1 year ago, many of our friends and colleagues from across the federal agencies had to pull their summit registrations. An executive order under the Trump administration banned participation in various types of diversity trainings and sent ambiguity and fear across the public sector. Months later, the Biden-Harris administration quickly reversed course and has implemented the Bostock decision to bolster LGBTQ protections across federal agencies. We at Out and Equal, of course, welcome these changes. And we are in the long game to support and partner with federal agencies, no matter the administration. When we think about what diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility looks like in government versus the private sector, the conversation shifts from things like the business case and market share to a lens of mission-driven public service, and major changes are already underway across agencies. We're honored to have Jamie Keene, Domestic Policy Counsel with the Executive Office of the President, who is helping lead the current administration in its mission to advance LGBTQ equality throughout the country. Following that, we'll hear from a panel of leaders from different agencies to learn more about how they are institutionalizing LGBTQ inclusion and their own individual experiences with public service. And finally, we are thrilled to welcome Kiran Ahuja, Director of the Office of Personnel Management. She previously spent years as a leader in the nonprofit sector and is the first South Asian American and first Asian American woman to lead OPM. Thank you all, and we welcome our work ahead.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jamie Keene. I serve as Deputy Director for Racial and Economic Justice at the White House Domestic Policy Council. I'm part of a team at the White House that is advancing President Biden's whole of government agenda on racial justice and equity to ensure that the federal government is equitably serving and investing in communities that have been left behind for far too long. And advancing equality for LGBTQ+ communities is really at the heart of this agenda. As you may know, on his first day in office, President Biden signed 2 historic executive orders that together are advancing equality for LGBTQ+ people across our country. First, he signed an executive order establishing a whole of government initiative on equity and racial justice for underserved communities. And that order charges every federal agency with putting equity at the heart of its mission. And that includes serving LGBTQ+ communities and other communities long impacted by persistent poverty and discrimination. Second, he signed one of the most comprehensive executive orders in history on LGBTQ+ rights. This order directs all agencies to prevent and combat discrimination on the basis of gender identity and sexual orientation. And it's one of the most consequential policies for LGBTQ+ Americans ever signed by a US president. As a result of that executive order, agencies have taken critical steps to expand non-discrimination protections in healthcare, in housing and shelter, in credit and lending services, and in education. But we also know that to fully advance equity for the American people, we need a workforce that fully reflects the diversity of our nation, where public servants from all walks of life can thrive, and where leaders are equipped with the tools and support systems they need to advance justice and opportunity for communities that have been locked out for too long. And that's why during Pride Month, the president signed an executive order on advancing diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility in the federal workforce. A quick note on that acronym, you'll hear me saying DEIA throughout my remarks, and this reflects a really intentional choice on the part of our administration to elevate accessibility as a core part of our affirmative equity agenda in the workplace. So even with decades of progress building a federal workforce that looks like America, the enduring legacies of employment discrimination, systemic racism, and gender inequality are still felt today. And too many underserved communities remain underrepresented in the federal workforce, especially in positions of leadership. This executive order establishes an ambitious whole of government initiative that takes a systematic and data-driven approach to embedding DEIA in federal employment policies. And it's helping us to build back from the erosion of DEIA policies and programs over the last 4 years. This order establishes a host of new priorities, ranging from advancing pay equity to reducing our reliance on unpaid internships, from expanding employment opportunities for formerly incarcerated individuals to growing the federal government's use of implicit bias trainings. It also helps us create, for the first time ever, a comprehensive federal framework on addressing harassment, including sexual harassment, in the workplace. And this executive order also directs the federal government to become a model employer for LGBTQ plus employees. And I want to talk for a few moments about some of the policies that it establishes in that regard. To advance opportunity for LGBTQ plus employees in the federal workforce, the executive order directs agencies to ensure that federal health benefit services equitably serve LGBTQ plus employees, their families, and their dependents. For example, by expanding access to comprehensive gender-affirming care. The order also directs agencies to ensure that other federal benefits like sick leave and life insurance equitably serve LGBTQ plus people and families, and all families with diverse family structures. The order charges agencies with ensuring that the use of gender markers and pronouns in the federal employment process respects transgender, gender nonconforming, and non-binary employees, and it directs all agencies to explore opportunities to expand access to gender-neutral facilities inside the federal workforce. The order takes new steps to mitigate bias in the background investigation process, and that can uniquely impact transgender employees. And finally, it charges all agencies with ensuring that their employee support services equitably serve LGBTQ plus people, including transgender and non-binary employees who wish to legally, medically, or socially transition at work. These changes in our civilian workforce policies complement the work the administration has already done to rescind the ban on open service by transgender service members and expand access to culturally competent care and services for LGBTQ plus veterans and their families. Of course, personnel is policy, and that's why the president has assembled the most diverse administration in our nation's history. This includes barrier-breaking LGBTQ plus leaders like Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg and Assistant Secretary for Health Dr. Rachel Levine, two of the first openly LGBTQ plus people to be confirmed by the US Senate for the roles that they now hold. But it also includes the 14% of all Biden-Harris administration appointees who identify as LGBTQ plus. As an out and proud public servant myself, helping to lead this work is especially meaningful. We recently commemorated the 10th anniversary of the end of the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy. And it was a powerful reminder of how far our nation has come and how far we still have to go to achieve full equality. So as the president continues to push for passage of the Equality Act in Congress and use every tool within government to advance support for LGBTQ plus families, we're grateful for the work of community and business leaders like you who are doing your part to help achieve full equality across our country. Thank you so much.
Thank you to Jamie Keene from the White House Domestic Policy Council for kicking us off, and welcome to today's panel discussion on new directions for the federal workforce, diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility across agencies. I'm Mari Munson. My pronouns are they, them, or she, her, and I'm currently on assignment to the U.S. Office of Personnel Management from the Environmental Protection Agency, working on LGBTQ plus equity and inclusion. I came to the federal government in 2008 because I believe national environmental policy is a critical part of protecting the health and well-being of every person who lives and works in this country. And what keeps me in federal service now is my passion for fostering full, equitable treatment and inclusion for current and future federal employees. I'm very excited to moderate today's session with a total rockstar panel. We are super lucky to have 4 incredibly accomplished and thoughtful leaders in workforce diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility with us today. So I will ask them now to introduce themselves before we dive into our discussion. Panelists, please tell us who you are and what drew you to federal service and what keeps you here. Bali, I'll start with you.
Hello. Yes, I came to NIH originally as an IRDA, that's an internal research training awardee, and I was drawn to my role now as a strategist in the Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion because I really was impressed by how they work to support, EDI and NIH and the continued advocacy for SGM, sexual and gender minorities, throughout the workspace and in federal space as well.
Thank you, Bali. Alex.
Hi, my name is Alex. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I've been an intelligence analyst with the FBI for 6 years. And for the past 2 years, I've been chair of Bureau Equality, which is one of the FBI's 9 diversity advisory committees that represents different minority populations within the workforce. Serving on Bureau Equality is a collateral duty. We report to the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. Our mission is to identify and raise awareness of issues affecting the LGBT+ workforce at the FBI and make recommendations to senior executive management on how to best address them. Civic duty is really important to me, and I've always been interested in a career in public service. In college, I took a few classes on terrorism as well as politically and religiously motivated violence. And that kind of set off a light bulb in my brain. I suddenly knew that's what I wanted to do with my life and my career. And I've been drawn by the mission to protect the American people and uphold the Constitution. And honestly, the work is what keeps me here every day. I wake up feeling really proud and really privileged that I get to do what I do for a living, keeping perfect strangers and their families safe.
Thank you, Alex. Rita, over to you.
Yes, thank you so much, Mari, and thanks to Out and Equal for having us here. Rita Sampson, I have had the pleasure of leading strategic diversity, equity, inclusion, and equal employment opportunity programs across the federal government for approximately 24 years, both as I know, right, as a practicing attorney working in places like the FBI, across the Department of Justice, and most recently with the U.S. intelligence community. And in those roles, we've been able to work together to find the best way to ensure that our workforce reflects the American people in all aspects, and that we identify and eliminate any areas where discrimination could or might occur. And so these are the things that really get my juices flowing in the morning, because I feel like I have a sense of purpose. And every day you wake up with a sense of purpose. And what keeps me here is knowing that there is more work to be done and that there are amazing people who are dedicated to that work that I get to work with every day. So thank you again for having me here.
Beautiful. Thank you, Rita. And finally, Natalie, over to you.
Last but not least, thank you, Mari. I'm excited to be here. Name is Natalie Beanie. My pronouns are she, her, and I have been with the federal government since 2018. And what drew me here, it's interesting. I grew up with public servant parents. And so I was that rebellious teen that was like, I don't want to do public service, only to know that I'm all about public service. I was a Girl Scout. I did, student government. Like it's one of those things where you're like, why did you even resist it? Definitely found my home here when I came to the federal government, really beginning in disability program management out of an EO office and moving into cultural transformation, looking at diversity and inclusion across from a department level. And now, of course, looking at diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility government-wide. And what keeps me here is a passion for public service. I want every public servant to be like Alex, right? To talk about their careers in a way that keeps them coming, keeps them excited, keeps them waking up. And so that's why I continue to be here. I want every federal employee to feel passionate about their public service as we do here.
Thank you, Natalie. And thank you so much to all of our panelists for joining us today. So Natalie, I'm going to kick it back to you and start with a question about what's most important for us to know about the current focus on LGBTQ+ equity under the Biden-Harris administration. How are you looking at LGBTQ+ equity in the broader context of diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility across the entire federal government?
Thanks. So as Jamie discussed in the opening, President Biden made advancing equity for LGBTQ plus federal employees and their dependents a priority in the DEIA executive order. It's important to know that federal agencies across government have been reviewing and submitted recently via survey their DEIA, all of those initials, right? The DEIA practices that they are currently implementing around the talent life cycle. That means outreach, hiring, advancement, retention, all of those. Now, they are currently self-assessing to evaluate whether potential barriers or gaps to DEIA exist within their programs. I share that to highlight we are in motion. And that is important because we know anecdotally that some D&I programs have not been active, right? Or have not been viewed as a priority in recent years. I've received numerous emails from federal employees across the workforce excited about the prominence of LGBTQ plus inclusion in the DEI work ahead. So if you take a look at the EO, section 11 of the EO, it's specific to the LGBTQ plus community. But I'm excited because the intersectionality between the LGBTQ plus community and all of the top lines of the EO are also important. And those are building a diverse pipeline, eliminating pay gaps for access to wealth building, having a safe workplace, reducing inequitable barriers in hiring, promotion, professional development, and retention practices. All of those things impact the many workplace cultures that make up the federal workforce and our reputation as a model employer for diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion. So, Mari, in the broadest context, the executive order is about equity and access with an emphasis on underserved communities to provide public servants at all levels with an equal opportunity to succeed and lead in an inclusive workplace amongst diverse colleagues.
Excellent. Thank you, Natalie, and really appreciate you outlining for us the incredible importance of the intersectionality piece of this work across federal agencies. Alex and Rita, I want to talk now about the role of employee resource groups in LGBTQ plus equity work and what we can accomplish with partnerships between employee resource groups and our diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility and human resources offices. Alex, a little birdie told me about an award you received for your work that you led as part of your ERG. Will you please tell us about it?
Yes, thank you. I was part of the team of past and current Bureau Equality members who won the 2020 Directors Award for Excellence in Diversity and Inclusion. We won it for our efforts putting together a web-based training called Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity 101, or SOGI 101. And when it's released during the next few months, it will be mandatory for all 35,000 plus FBI employees. And it covers topics like pronouns, what to do if you hear someone in your office making an inappropriate joke or reference, the difference between cisgender and transgender, and perhaps most importantly, how to be an ally for your LGBT plus colleagues. We have a few other trainings on topics like unconscious bias, but SOGI 101 is going to be the very first of its kind mandatory training that's dedicated to a specific demographic. One of Bureau Equality's continuing goals is increasing education and awareness of LGBT plus issues among the workforce. And so we're really proud that we'll be able to accomplish that with this training.
Thank you, Alex. And just a couple of follow-ons for you. I'm interested and curious if there's anything you can share about how you navigate making a training like this mandatory versus optional. Is there anything you can add about that?
Yes. A few years ago, Bureau Equality put together a report where we asked our listserv, we have about 600 people on our listserv, and it's our way of communicating with them. It is LGBT plus employees and allies, and it's completely voluntary to join. And we send out correspondences every once in a while Well, a few years ago, we asked for instances of any perceived discriminatory allegations against them based on their sexual orientation and gender identity. And we asked them to trust us with those stories and that we would anonymize them and aggregate them so that we could then bring it forward to senior executive management. And so once we identified that there were issues popping up here and there, we were able to find patterns. And the one pattern that came up the most is lack of education and awareness. So we have, since we report to the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, we have a direct channel to executive management. So we were able to have a series of meetings with individuals from the director's office, and they asked us for our recommendations. And that's when we were able to harness the power that we have as a diversity advisory committee to identify a problem, but more importantly, to make a recommendation on how to resolve it. And we said, you know, one thing we think would help is a mandatory training so that people can understand the nuances, you know, why, like I mentioned, why are pronouns so important? What does life look like in someone else's shoes who's different from me? And fortunately, management agreed, and we were able to get the executive assistant director for human resources to sign off on this web-based training to be mandatory for everyone. So, you know, in a bureaucracy, nothing happens quickly or easily. You have to go through several layers of approval and review. And even though it takes time, it's always worth it in the end.
Great. Thank you, Alex. And just one final question about this fantastic SOGI training that you've implemented. You mentioned that part of the training is helping people understand what to do when they hear a discriminatory remark or witness something. Can you say a little bit more about whether people practice those skills in a learning environment so that they're more equipped to do it when it happens in the real world?
Yes, I've actually noticed that in my own office, which is both, you have to find the silver lining in that, right? Because we have people from all sorts of generations. And what happened for me actually was someone used the word queer. And, you know, generationally, that word has very different connotations. And so it was a really good learning experience for people of different age ranges, as well as sexual orientation and gender identity, to be able to take advantage of that moment and educate. One of the things that we offer is some resources from the Intel Community Pride group. We work with FBI Pride. Bureau Equality works with FBI Pride, which is our employee resource group, and they're independent. They do not report to the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. And we're also plugged into the Intel Community Pride group. We have a couple of representatives who sit in on those meetings and then bring back any reports. So one of the great resources that the Intel Community Pride group has is Conversations at Work. It's a really easy 2-page sheet on, based on your level of comfortability in confronting a colleague, here's what you might say at every step of the way. You might say, hey, that's not funny, or let me explain to you why that might be offensive. And it's a really good resource. So we incorporate some of that into the SOGI 101 training.
Great. Thank you again, Alex. Really helpful and exciting. Rita, during your time as the Chief of Equal Employment Opportunity and Diversity in the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, I know that you've partnered pretty extensively and very successfully with the intelligence community, LGBTQ+, ERG, IC Pride. Can you share with us what's a good example of what you've been able to accomplish, and maybe what advice you would give to ERG members for how to succeed in their organizations?
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Yeah, absolutely. So IC Pride really excites me as an employee resource group. We call them an affinity network because it's not just within the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. Our core goal at the ODNI includes what we call leading the intelligence community which means we need a strategic vision that we're all driving toward. But we have 18 independent agencies all working together under an umbrella. So IC Pride is the convening of all of the interests of the intelligence community, particularly with the LGBTQ plus community. It was the first group that we were chartering as part of the EEO and diversity efforts. And the success of that organization has led to the stand-up of other affinity networks across the community. I think in any ERG, there's always a risk that people lose direction. And so the thing I love about IC Pride is that the direction is firmly etched in their charter. It is tied to the strategic mission of the U.S. intelligence community. They have an infrastructure built in around core concerns, such as transgender working group, education and training working group. We have an annual all workplace summit where we pull together 500 or more people within the intelligence community in person. We have senior champions that are the people whose voices they're able to get into the senior staff meetings to influence the policy, to influence the behaviors within the workforce. And then they have a direct line of reporting to my office, and they have to tie themselves to the diversity and inclusion strategy. So I think the first thing is knowing where you're going and then having the right people in the room to make sure that the advocacy and the top cover exist and that we are actually holding them accountable for outcomes. I think that tying the activities into the diversity and inclusion strategy are key, because what we've been able to encourage IC Pride to do, and I shouldn't say encourage them because they are forced to be reckoned with all by themselves. And so I don't have the difficulty of encouraging activities. But I think that it's the mission, it's the support from the senior IC leaders, it's ensuring that activities align to the broader purpose for the intelligence community. And then looking at deliverables and products from there. One of the things that we're really proud of is a working guide for how do managers best work with the IC Pride constituency, communities, looking at all aspects of the talent cycle. How do we recruit the talent that's necessary to lead the intelligence community mission, which is a mission of national security, which is a mission of diversity? We have to have all perspectives around hard problems that are global in nature, complex, technology-driven, human-driven, all of that. And so we need talent from all segments of society. And working with IC Pride, we've really been able to increase our talent pool. And that's the first thing. So then you go from attracting talent to hiring talent, to developing talent, and then to promotions. So we look at the relationship with IC Pride with great admiration. And it's been always my pleasure to work with the leadership team there and really push them in that way. But we've seen that the power of ERGs is much what Alex said. They have to be invited to the table for core decisions. Those kind of decisions that impact not just the people within the IC Pride community, but the whole workforce. And so that's the acceptance within the intelligence community has been key. And then the last thing I'll say is they've also been instrumental in helping dispel myths about the intelligence community and to demystify the community, because so many people believe that there's no way they could get in. There's no way that they could pass the security clearance. There's too much of an invasion in privacy. And quite frankly, that those myths have been out there for a while. There were points in time where disclosing yourself as LGBTQ were disqualifying, but those days are long gone. And so we just are working toward helping people understand that this is a welcoming environment and that we need all segments of society. And just really proud to work with the other agencies here across the federal government and in achieving that.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Rita, and really appreciate what you shared about the importance of having senior leadership, creating space at the table for the ERG and affinity group members and vice versa, that the persistence and tenacity of those ERG leaders is equally important. So thank you for sharing that. Bali, I would love to hear your thoughts about allyship. I'm curious, what does allyship mean to you personally? Why is it so important? And how can we all do it well?
Thanks, Mari. First, let me say, as the newbie of the group, I mean, clearly I haven't been here as long as others, and I came in the last administration. So this administration shift is the first time I'm experiencing this, and it's wonderful to see all the work that's happening now. And even when I was post-bac fellow in NIH, and I was working with SGMRO and other offices, that's how I became aware of the work that you were doing, Mari, and also you, Natalie. And I was impressed by the work that was happening in the intelligence community, but I didn't have the faces to put with that. So I really appreciate being able to meet with you and learn about all the great work that you're doing there. But the way that I came to be that post-bac at NIH was because I was interested in doing doctoral work, continuing my education. And the school that I was interested in suggested that I meet with a PhD scout who is a white transgender man. And as a Black trans woman, I hadn't met other people. And so they wanted to link me up with him to learn more about it. And he said, well, if you want to do any type of doctoral work, Bali, with the background I had in working at community-based organizations and hospitals, he said, you should really look into the NIH internship program. So I did that, and I was able to start that process and be here for like a year, where I was able to work with other queer scholars across NIH. And what is important about allyship is, as my role as a strategist, I create the things that we do around Pride and everything, along with Salutaris, our ERG, which I'm the vice chair of, by the way. And we, this year, decided to focus on pronoun uses and stuff, because I was being approached by trans and gender nonconforming people across NIH who were getting misgendered in the lab or in their workspace, in their cubicles, and they really wanted to have that addressed. So it was, and I'm lucky to be able to have that kind of position where I can create a whole thing, a whole program to try to address that need. Now, the whole point around that, central to that, is allyship, in that I wouldn't be where I am if it wasn't for a white trans man coming to me and saying, this is an opportunity. I wouldn't be able to, I transitioned before I got here, so I hadn't had to deal with the issue of gender. So it's about, and there's a whole, another strategist is in charge of people with disabilities portfolio, and we work together around SGM with disabilities. So when we did something in the past about allyship for our Pride campaigns, we could receive feedback from LGBT people saying that we were focusing here at NIH on non-queer people. And they assumed, and even when they referenced it on Twitter or wherever, they were saying, oh, those white men, those old white men at NIH don't know what they're doing when they're talking about this. And they didn't realize it was me, a Black trans woman, who was working with others across NIH through these different bodies that I mentioned to create something that we knew we needed here at NIH. So, because the way it is, I'm at my level, and others are, have managers and supervisories, and often those people are not the same communities as us, right? So it's important that they understand the issues and feel comfortable with it, and make strides to try to address some of the inequities, so that we can have the same access to move up and to move around. And so it's important that not only our colleagues know about these things as ally and become allies, but also our managers should know. And one of the things that we do at NIH is we have a safe zone training that I run quarterly, where we address those, not just for SGM people themselves, but also for the allies. And my pushback to the people that were complaining about our focus on allies at different times was that, we have to be allies to each other within the LGBT community. It's often thought that it's non-LGBT people helping LGBT people, but I had the privilege of meeting Sylvia Rivera before she passed away, and she was very adamant about her work in addressing white cisgender gay men and their exclusion of Black and Latina trans women. And so I think that when we expand this idea of what ally is, we understand that we all have room to use some of the privilege that we have access to help others who don't have those privileges. So that's kind of the work that we're focusing on around allyship here.
Thank you so much, Bali. That's incredibly powerful, both your personal story of how allyship has enabled and supported you and how you are serving as an ally to others. And I really appreciate the prospect of even within the LGBTQ plus community, us all learning how to be allies to each other and allies across identities to the disability community and on racial justice and equity. Really appreciate that, Bali. Thank you. In the private sector, we talk a lot about the business case for keeping a leading edge in LGBTQ plus inclusion and belonging, from market share to innovation to talent retention and more. But government work is a little bit different. It's mission-driven public service. Rita and Bali, what's the connection of LGBTQ plus equity in the federal government workforce to mission work in your organizations that's external facing?
Well, I'll go first. That is, I think it's foundational, right? Because the US government is in a competition for talent. They're in a competition for talent with the private sector. Agencies are in competition with one another for top tier talent. And and the research shows that the more diverse, the more inclusive organizations are, the more they're attractive to people. And so we want to be the most attractive employer in the nation. And in order to do that, we have to get diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. We've got to get it right. What I have seen over the years is that people didn't understand the why behind diversity, inclusion, these things. Many people thought it was something that's nice to do. And I will agree with you that it is very nice to do. But I will also say that it's a matter of our nation's prosperity. It's a matter of our nation being the model for the world. It's in alignment with our values as a nation. And so these are the things that we have to do as a whole. And then there's the practical day-to-day. And I'll just use the intelligence community because that's where I spent the last 12 years as an example. If what we're trying to do is find nuance, make sense out of multiple points of data, inform our decision makers about what is the likely course of action, we have to look at things from every perspective that is possible. And we can't just invite the talent or hire the talent and then invite them to have a seat and say nothing. We actually have to use the talent that we have hired. And we have to invite their perspectives, create the conditions where people feel safe to contribute to the discourse that's happening, to debate one another, and to really get to the bottom line of our intelligence advice to the president, to Congress, to the lawmakers, to the people who are on the front line fighting for our country. And so it's not just the nice thing to do. It really is. We need the perspectives. We need the talent wherever it resides, and we need the perspectives at the table. And so to me, it's a no-brainer that diversity, inclusion, LGBT inclusion, all of the nuances of what individuals identify as, how individuals identify, how they want to present. I want people who have a sense of security and psychological safety in my workplace. I want them to know that when they're here, they can be their best selves, they can be respected, they can be quirky, they can be funny, they can be serious as they want to be, they can be whoever they are. And that we welcome them and that we invite them to the table. And so, I'm quirky all day long. And so I love the fact that I get to be myself as part of a leader in the intelligence community. And the LGBT community, we have really done a lot of work with Out and Equal, with other organizations to really dispel myths. And I think that's important. And I think really being able to leverage one another in this space. And the last thing I'll say is that with our Pride community, we have seen them be able to take on leadership roles to help other communities, other underrepresented, other underserved communities, and do so intentionally. So looking at how we work with HBCUs, how we work with persons with disabilities. We have an amazing deaf and hard of hearing affinity network within the intelligence community. And so we don't operate in stovepipes, we work with one another. So our employee resource groups will support one another, will collaborate on initiatives. And I've seen the success of that over the course of years. And so, you know, I could go on about the importance of LGBT inclusion in the IC, but it is very real. It's very real across the whole of government, from law enforcement to policy making to whatever we're doing. And it's something that we're very conscious of, and it has to happen.
Thank you, Rita. And here's to being exactly who we are. Bali.
Yeah. I'm so inspired by what Rita was speaking about, and similarly at NIH, we understand that everyone needs to be able to access and have a seat at the table, and to, you know, like, because we're, you know, it's important that we have a voice in the science and for members of our community and others. And I think that we really bring a new and different perspectives that are vital to the workforce as scientists and as administrative professionals across NIH. My role at NIH is really to get a better understanding of the NIH workplace for STM employees so that we can make it a better, safer space. And, you know, to get more insights about how people are recruited, who's recruited, who gets through, who's retained, who advances, who leaves and why, so that we can try to address those issues. And, you know, to increase STM engagement across NIH. One of the things at NIH we have is a multi-generational, we have people who've been here a long, long time, and we have people who are coming straight out of colleges and who have a whole different experience of freedom to talk about who they are. And so it's really important to meet all those different needs. And then for me to come up with recommendations on current and future policies around D&I, diversity and inclusion for NIH leadership. And then mentioned earlier was SOGI data and how important it is to have that kind of data that really explains all these things. We've talked about this before, Mari and others, but that because of those different perspectives, some people are familiar with like the lavender scare and those experiences where people in the federal government were fired and who were not allowed to work here. Some people have that's closer in their memory than others. And that's a barrier that we try to work on to create that kind of safe space that people feel more comfortable, that Rita was mentioning. One example, I have an engagement committee that I work with across NIH, and so that includes people who are federal employees as well as interns like I was myself. And a great case that happened recently was that someone had come as a post-bac and had left their master's program because somewhere else because they were treated so badly. They came to NIH and they were through our Office of Internal Training and Education and working with our office and EDI, we were able to really give them the kind of support, and they were able to connect with PIs and stuff who were understanding, and we were able to facilitate that education piece. And now they left and were accepted into a PhD program and have been able to come through NIH, get those kind of connections because of this work, and will be one of the leading voices from our community in shaping science in the future. So that's what I'm here for, you know, to facilitate that any way that I can, to get in where I fit in. And that's just one example. There are many others that have happened and are in process. And it's because of the advice and leadership I've gotten from you, as well as from other NIH people on the ground in my own organization. So that's good news.
Thank you, Bali. That's so powerful. And I'm just so grateful that we have you at NIH. Natalie, Bali mentioned sexual orientation and gender identity workforce data collection. I wonder if there's anything you'd like to add from your perspective about next steps in establishing sexual orientation and gender identity, or SOGI, data in the federal government and how we do this work.
Thanks, Maury. As you well know, this topic has become a bit of the proverbial onion. As we peel back a layer, we keep finding new layers. So I'll start with that foundation in the beginning, and that really is understanding, basic understanding of survey methodology. It's not as simple as ask a question and get an answer. It's a lot. It's how you ask the question and what order you ask the question and what words you ask the question and what order do you put the words. So my point being, there's a method, and it's important when we move forward that we have the most recent information from those subject matter experts in survey methodology who do this work around multiple places, the workplace, externally for the American public, really to have an understanding around, what are we asking, right? But I think what we've talked about, that next level of onion that we've peeled back, is that more importantly, the next step is communication, right? Providing that baseline layer of why to federal employees, to LGBTQ plus feds, implementers across federal government of any type of agency data collection process. And I'm not talking about, oh, here's a flyer on why we do this. No. I'm talking about an intentional conversations around data collection. So what is that? That looks like confidentiality, right? And privacy. And what do we currently use to get that information? And is that appropriate? And what would we use this SOGI data for? And how would we collect it again? And is there a standard form for that? How does the government get it? How does it leave my agency and get to a government-wide aggregate? Again, the onion. It's lots of questions that are being asked. Here's what I'm excited about. We are collaborating across government in an inclusive and transparent way about SOGI data collection. We are voicing the tough questions, right? Because we have that safe space, Rita. We are connecting our subject matter experts to build on, what has already been done. And when we get stumped, we are opening the door to include others for new insights into this work. For me, that's inspiring. I wish I could, push a magic button and say to the entire federal workforce, on this day, we will begin collecting SOGI data government-wide. I can't say that. What I can say is that we are exploring and will continue to provide technical assistance and guidance to federal agencies on demographic data collection. And stay tuned, there's definitely more to come.
Can I give a shout out
Thank you,
to
Natalie.
Maury? Because your work in the area of SOGI collection data put us leaps ahead. So we're not starting from ground zero in this area. And I know I've invited you into the intelligence community on multiple occasions to talk to us about what are some of the pilots that have happened? What are some of the successes? What are the best practices? And I think as we continue to do that, to tap into the expertise that's already out there, as Natalie said, we're making momentum, we're gaining momentum. And when we have these data points communicated, then we're able to really understand the experience of the communities that we're working with. And I think that's one of the key reasons why we want to keep doing the work that's being done.
Thank you, Natalie, and thank you, Rita, for the shout out. It has been a massive team effort with lots of key players in working toward SOGI data collection in the workforce in the federal government. And I feel honored and lucky and grateful that I get to continue working in this area. So thank you. We all know we still have a lot of work to do for LGBTQ plus workplace equity and inclusion. Alex, what are some ongoing barriers to entry for LGBTQ plus folks in federal service, and what can we do about it?
That's a great question. One of the things we're doing here in the FBI is adding guidance to our physical fitness test policy guide. So when you apply to be a special agent, you have to take a physical fitness test. and it is scored in accordance with your sex. And the policy guides stipulates that it be taken in accordance with your sex assigned at birth. So this is obviously, it obviously poses some issues for transgender applicants. We're very, very close to finalizing guidance that will make the physical fitness test, or PFT, policy guide more inclusive for transgender special agent applicants by allowing transgender special agent applicants to take the PFT in accordance with their gender identity. So this is actually something that's come up more and more recently, where our field office recruiters come back to us and say, hey, you know, I met with a prospective applicant at a recruiting event. They really want to apply to be a special agent. What's our policy in terms of, you know, someone who's transgender and wants to apply to be a special agent? So we're really excited about it. And once it's finalized, it will definitely help us be more competitive in attracting that top talent. Like Rita mentioned earlier, we are still dispelling myths at recruitment events that you can't be gay and work for the FBI. We have a lot of ground to cover to try to change that perception. And frankly, it's on us to lead that. But, you know, it's not enough to just wave a rainbow flag and pass out some stickers and, you know, say all are welcome here. It's having something tangible like that, like the policy guide, to show applicants that, you know, look, we're taking steps internally to create and sustain a diverse, inclusive, and equitable workplace culture. And one way we're doing that is making sure our policies reflect that too. So the PFT policy guide is just one example. We recently wrapped up another big project where we looked at all of our internal forms and made changes wherever necessary to make them gender inclusive. So whether if it's a drop down where before it was only male, female, or allowing for free form fields wherever we can, that was another thing that we spearheaded. And another initiative underway, speaking in terms of data collection, is adding non-binary as a category for data that we collect from law enforcement organizations across the country. Every year we put out what's called the Uniform Crime Report, and it's an annual thing we publish that shares statistics about crimes that have been committed across the US. And so we are in the process of adding non-binary as a data field that we will collect so that we can collect and publish data, particularly as it pertains to demographics, as accurately as possible.
Thank you. And Alex, one more question for you. I know that background checks can still be a challenge and potential barrier for LGBTQ plus folks interested in federal service. Are you willing to share your personal experience on this?
Yes, they can be very nerve-wracking, particularly for anyone who's LGBT, let alone anyone going through the security process. Not only are you subjected to a very in-depth investigation, but you also have to take a polygraph examination that tests and confirms your truthfulness. So the background covers everything from previous employment, family members, any overseas contacts you might have, things like that. And it can be really uncomfortable for some LGBT plus folks, particularly if they're not out to their friends and family yet. One thing to keep in mind here for context is that it wasn't until 1995 that President Clinton issued an executive order that banned the federal government from denying security clearances because of someone's sexual orientation and gender identity. So we're talking less than 30 years ago. It would have been perfectly okay for the federal government to deny me a security clearance because of of who I love or how I identify. So when I went through the process, I was dating my now wife at the time, and she had to be interviewed as part of that. I listed her as my roommate or cohabitant on the form. So it was a little awkward for her when the investigator asked her how she knew me. And so she said, well, we're together. And he said, okay, where were you together? Are you living together? Where are you together? And so she had to essentially disclose the nature of our relationship. And, it's a little awkward. And I understand that there are some rules and regulations about what background investigators can or cannot ask. And perhaps we'll learn a little bit more about that. But my parents were also not supportive of my sexuality and sexual orientation at that time when I was going through the background. And I knew that they were also going to be interviewed as a part of that. So, in the back of my head, I was just worried that they might say something that might cost me my security clearance and my job. Of course, I'm here now, so I got through. And it's a nerve-wracking experience for anyone, particularly for people in our community. But I know that there are steps underway to make sure that it is a little better and easier for folks.
Thanks, Alex. And I think a lot of folks can relate to your personal experience and how nerve-wracking this process can be. Rita, would you like to add anything about how to address and improve this barrier going forward?
Absolutely. We have heard loud and clear that these are some challenges, antidotes that we've received over time. And just last summer, we hosted a town hall where we invited everyone in the intelligence community to hop online. And we brought together the security executive agent for the federal government, the National Security Counterintelligence Center, those leads, the people responsible for personnel security, and we had a conversation. And I think it's great because it's the first start, that those people who are responsible for adjudicating backgrounds understand that the very real personal impact that they have on the very people we need to do our missions. And so that was an amazing conversation. From there are commitments that have been made to improve the training that is provided to those people who go out and do background investigators, so that we're not accidentally misgendering people, so that we are not disclosing more information than should be disclosed for purposes of the background investigation. And keep in mind, this is not just let's probe and find out everything we need to know about, or everything we can know about people. The purpose is to ask the question, is this individual someone we can trust with the secrets of our nation? And is this person loyal to the United States? And so those are the real areas of focus. You look at the relationships, both foreign and domestic, but I think it's an education space. The polygraph, really working with polygraphers to monitor, to be able to provide feedback. And if you had a bad experience, be able to tell someone who will take it for action so that it never happens again. And so those are the kind of things that we are right in the middle of, even as we speak, and just looking to improve. Because again, go back to, what do we want? We want a world-class workforce from all segments of society that reflect all segments of society. And so getting these things right is how we'll get there. And can I also say one last thing, I swear. Last summer, 2020, the Bostock decision from the Supreme Court, that really propelled us into a place where we can at least exhale for a moment on whether or not employment discrimination against LGBT members of our society are covered under the civil rights laws. In the past, we've always had an executive order that we're working under, or at least recent past, that prohibited discrimination based on sexual orientation. but that was an internal agency remedy. It didn't allow access to federal courts or the EEOC. But with the 2020 decision, it's pretty firm. It is firm. It is the law of the land that discrimination on the basis of LGBTQ plus status is discrimination because of sex, and therefore it is prohibited within the federal workforce, period. And that's a victory for all of us, because protecting and safeguarding civil rights is what we give to our workforce and what they're entitled to. And so, progress definitely being made, sustainable progress. And that's one thing that we're really, really excited about continuing.
Could I jump in for just 1 second and say, I participated in that town hall last summer, and I was so appreciative of how constructive the dialogue was. It's not an easy thing to do, to open yourself up to criticism, not necessarily negative criticism, but you have to be very self-aware of where there are opportunities for improvement and say, look, I know that maybe we haven't done this as well as we could in the past, but we will take steps to make it easier for people who come after us. I thought it was a really great example of some of the top levels of the federal government who adjudicate the investigations, not only inviting us to the table, but also allowing us to share our experiences and look at our processes honestly and with a critical eye so that we can improve. Thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. It's that onion that Natalie was talking about, right? It's complicated, but we are committed. So.
Thank you, Alex and Rita. And it is very heartening to hear about all this progress from a policy standpoint, the clear legal mandate, and also from the education and cultural competency training aspect. Thank you. Bali, let's talk about future of work, and particularly how you're seeing millennials and Gen Z folks changing the federal workforce. What changes need to be made to continue attracting and retaining top talent?
Thanks, Mari. One of the things that we're seeing at NIH, because of what I talked about before about the internships and things like that, we see people coming from universities who have the opportunity to use language and express themselves in ways that it's new. And like I said, I've been here for 4 years now, and things have changed even since I did my graduate work and now have been here. So it's very different. So when I'm interacting with new students, interns and things, I'm learning things myself. And so it's really important to try to bring that into the workspace and to create systems like we've been working with the NED system, our NIH Enterprise Directory, like our employee directory, to try to increase. And I get emails all the time. I get requests like, how are we going to change this? We've been having meetings on just increasing our language and vocabulary to include a lot of different people. One of the person that I mentioned before that has now gone on to the PhD program after having such a hard time before they came, and then finding a home at NIH and really being supported, was a gender nonconforming person. And so they had to really work with, they asked me to come in and work with their offices and to create to just do that kind of education and explain what was going on. And I recruited them for my engagement committee that I mentioned before. And what we're really able to do is have people be part of that engagement committee and then go into NCI or NIDDK or wherever they're working to try to spread that information and create those structures and changes that need to happen. Another thing, that was one case where I came in and spoke with the management about language and things like that. But when we have someone who's in the gender affirming process, I meet with the employee themselves, their managers, any colleagues that might have an issue. If someone makes a homophobic comment or something, then I'm asked to come in and to negotiate that and try to work on creating a better work environment, a work climate. But we're also trying to change like our facilities to all be more open, like gender neutral restrooms and other facilities that would facilitate that. And you know, for Pride this year, I said that I was reached out to by gender nonconforming trans people who were being misgendered. And so we created like, on a website, on EDI's website, the Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, you can download like a PDF that really explains what pronoun usage looks like and better ways and what to use pronouns and what it means when you make a mistake, how to address it. And that's been useful and something that we're now working, because we did that in EDI, we're creating something across NIH that will be useful for people at different ICs for that. So those are some of the things that we're trying to do so that we can bring down some of those barriers. And hopefully, like, for example, I'm the only Black trans woman that I've encountered at this point. There are trans women that work at NIH. Some identify themselves and come open and come forward after I've come. So, but it's important to try to get at different levels people who represent our different experiences. And I think that when we talked about allyship before, that's a central and key point in doing that.
Thank you, Bali. And I personally have benefited greatly from seeing other non-binary and genderqueer folks enabling me and giving me the courage to understand and come out as a non-binary and genderqueer person myself. Thank you for sharing that. Natalie, our final question is for you. How can we institutionalize the LGBTQ+ workforce equity progress that we're making right now to make sure that it sticks in the long term so that it doesn't disappear in the future?
So let's talk about first doing what we can with what we have now. So with the EO that we have now, we need to be real intentional about embedding diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility into the fabric of what we do. And this looks like, you know, is advancing DEIA a strategic objective in your agency strategic planning? Are the priorities in your agency, you know, DEIA strategic plan reflected in the agency budget submission, right? Is it in the human capital operating plan? So for non-feds, these are all federal government routine practices, right? Is advancing equity, culture building, and, you know, exhibiting inclusion in the roles and responsibilities of all? Do we track it or measure it, or is it reflected in their annual performance of every federal employee? Are there meaningful agency-wide metrics for DEIA that are tracked, you know, and broadly communicated alongside mission-based priorities? Because it is a mission-based priority, not something separate and apart from. You know, we are led by our senior leadership. So having senior leadership, our SES, that are comfortable being out at work, or, you know, making sure that we provide that avenue for our senior leaders to self-identify their gender. All of that goes a long way in driving DEIA across government and really making it stick beyond, you know, one executive order. So I guess what I would like to say about, you know, the long term is we are the federal government. We do what is appropriated by our legislative branch and or required by regulation. And I'll leave that there.
Thank you, Natalie. And thank you so much to all of our panelists today. This has been an awesome discussion on LGBTQ+ diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility in the federal government. Huge thanks to Out and Equal for supporting this opportunity for such an important conversation. And thank you all, summit attendees, for participating today. Please stay tuned for closing remarks from our OPM Director, Kiran Ahuja, and thank you again.
Hello, everyone. I'm OPM Director Kiran Ahuja. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and as you can see, I have short black, mostly gray hair, and wear glasses. I'm thrilled to be joining you for the 2021 Out and Equal Workplace Summit. It's an honor to join one of the leading organizations working exclusively on LGBTQ+ workplace equality. The panel you all just watched with participants from across the federal government is a perfect example of how Out and Equal helps break down walls and remove silos. Your partnership and consultation with influential private and public entities allows LGBTQ plus people to thrive, and creates a culture of belonging for all. And it is that culture of belonging that I want to focus in on today. It resonates deeply with me as a daughter of immigrants and a product of the American dream. And it perfectly encapsulates a major tenet of our work at OPM. We're building the federal workforce and our country back better. And as we do it, we're making sure that we're as inclusive and welcoming as possible. My passion for this stems from my childhood spent in small towns and cities across Georgia, Louisiana, and Florida in the wake of the civil rights era. I saw the segregation of different races. I saw the stark disparities in health and economic opportunity. And I saw the kinds of injustices and inequality that I have dedicated my career to fighting ever since. You might think as a director of OPM, those early years seem far away by now. I guess I'm revealing a little bit of my age, but the lessons learned are with me every day. Challenging times taught me adaptability, perseverance, resilience. They taught me the kinds of traits I know my friends in the LGBTQ plus community develop as well. But those times also gave me a sense of purpose and taught me to build bridges with people of all walks of life. And at OPM, that's exactly what I'm doing. We're building a federal workforce that draws from the incredible diversity of backgrounds, viewpoints, and experiences of all people who live and work in this country. We're committed to working as hard for the 2.1 million civil servants in the federal workforce as they do for the American people. And without question, supporting all federal employees means supporting federal employees who are queer, intersex, non-binary, genderqueer, two-spirit, transgender, asexual, pansexual, bisexual, lesbian, gay, and every gender identity and sexual orientation. To return to that phrase, we want a culture of belonging. And if you are a service-minded individual, then we want you to be a part of our team. There is no doubt that the federal government will have a positive influence by leading by example on LGBTQ plus inclusion. No conversation about racial equity or disability equity would be complete without acknowledging the intersectionality they share with LGBTQ plus equity. And no conversation about pay equity would be complete without acknowledging the income gap that the LGBTQ plus community faces. But to be the change we seek, we must lead in this conversation. I know I bring a wide variety of perspectives and lived experiences to my many roles as director, and I'm focused on ensuring others have the same opportunities to contribute that I do. Sexual orientation and gender identity contribute to lived experiences and unique vantage points that enrich our workforce and allow us to better meet the needs of the American people. A truly welcoming and inclusive environment allows us to create a federal workforce that doesn't just rise to meet to our challenges of today, but lays the groundwork for all Americans to thrive for decades to come. As you know, President Biden made clear that the LGBTQ plus community is a priority in the DEIA executive order that he signed in late June. The executive order acknowledges that too many underserved communities remain underrepresented in the federal workforce, especially in positions of leadership. It establishes an ambitious whole of government initiative with a systematic approach to embedding DEIA in federal hiring and employment practices. It directs agencies to ensure the federal health benefits system equitably serves the LGBTQ plus employees and their dependents by expanding access to comprehensive gender-affirming healthcare coverage. It ensures that federal benefits like sick leave and life insurance are equitably provided to all individuals and all families with diverse family structures. It mandates that gender marker and pronoun options in the federal employment process respect transgender, gender nonconforming, and non-binary employees, and directs all agencies to explore opportunities to expand access to gender non-binary facilities inside federal workplaces. Finally, the order charges all federal agencies with ensuring that their employee support services equitably serve the LGBTQ plus employees, including transgender and gender nonconforming and non-binary employees who wish to legally, medically, and socially transition. OPM is proud to be leading on the DEI executive order implementation. While we are still examining these issues and their implications for the FEHB, the Federal Employee Health Benefits Program, the President has been very clear about his support for LGBTQ+ federal workers, and the DEIAEO has directed OPM to promote equitable healthcare coverage, including comprehensive gender-affirming care. So I'll close where I began, with the culture of belonging that brought you all together today for the Out and Equal Workplace Summit, and the same culture of belonging that we work to enact every day for the federal workforce. Thank you for the opportunity to join you today and for your incredible work creating space for every employee to thrive. Thank you.